Right, okay. Well, still may be able to find it. Right. Right. Good morning, everyone, both in the hearing room in Edinburgh and watching us on a YouTube. This morning, Craig Connell KC, counsel to the inquiry, will be leading the evidence of, I think, just one witness today, and that's Mr. Lambert. I have to apologize for two technical matters. First of all, we will be unable to display in the room and to those following on YouTube the documents. Now, this is a technical problem which is in the process of being fixed, but is not likely to be fixed today. Now, core participants, therefore, will require to access documents which have been previously disclosed to the core participants through their own laptops. Now, I apologize for that, and it may be that the pace may have to be a little bit slower. Now, the second technical problem is entirely my responsibility, which is I've left my notebook in my room. Now, I think that is being looked for, and we'll just begin with Mr. Lambert in the hope that Sylvia can identify my notebook. No. 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 Good morning, Mr. Lambert.
Good morning.
Please sit down.
Thanks.
Now, I understand that you would wish to make an affirmation.
Yes, please.
Sitting where you are, could I ask you to repeat after me? I solemnly, sincerely, and truly
I solemnly, sorry, can you repeat that?
declare and affirm
Declare and confirm
that I will tell the truth,
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lambert. Now, you'll be asked questions by Mr. Connell, who's sitting opposite you. We will probably sit until about 11:30, take a break then, and then sit on after a coffee break until 1, and we'll take a lunch break and then sit again at 2 o'clock. Now, that's our timing. But if at any time you want to take a break in the course of your evidence, just feel free to do so. Final thing I would say to you is you're quite quietly spoken. Now, as you can see, I'm speaking a little bit louder than I would in normal conversation. I'm speaking a little bit slower. It's not necessarily easy to do, but bear in mind that we have quite a large room. You've got the assistance of the microphones, and it shouldn't be a problem. But if I could ask you to speak just a little louder than you would normally. Thank you.
No problem.
Now, Mr. Connell.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Lambert. And if I can just add to that, you know more about these topics than I do. So if I ask you a question which is based on something that you know to be incorrect, please just tell me in responding to that question, and we'll get along fine. I'm going to be asking you questions broadly in the order in which they're set out in your statement, which I think you have been provided with a copy of.
Yep.
So that if you wish to look at your statement while I'm asking you about it, please feel free, or if you need more time to look at something, then please also let me know. I will be referring to a number of documents, many of which you'll be very familiar with as we go along, and hopefully these will then be made available for you to view in some way or another. So if we could, in your statement, you do give some information about your background and experience, but just to set the scene, can you tell us very briefly what kind of things it is that you and your company do?
We are a professional building services design consultant, so we specialise in the design of mechanical and electrical building services, so like heating systems, lighting systems, ventilation systems.
Right. I'm just going to stop you there and say, just bear in mind what His Lordship said about
Sure.
speaking up, so that we can hear the whole of your answer and everybody in the room can hear it as well. So basically, what might be called in short an M&E services engineer, is that
Yes.
yeah. Fair? Would that be the kind of label people would put on you?
Yes.
And you were also asked whether you and your company, which is called IDS Services, is that correct?
Innovative Design Solutions.
Innovative Design Solutions.
Yep.
Sorry, my correction. Have experience in the healthcare setting, is that so?
Yes.
Have you done lots of projects or the odd one, or what's your background?
A lot of different healthcare projects, so boiler rooms and cold water tank replacements, a lot of health centres. So not full hospitals, but various facilities within hospitals.
Thank you. Now, I'm just looking at your statement, and obviously the statement was formulated by asking you questions and then you gave answers to the questions. And at that time, not all of the documents we now know about were available. But on the second page of your statement, you're asked by the question at the time about your understanding of the need to appoint post holders to deal with ventilation compliance. Is that something you've come across in the course of your work?
Authorised engineers, yes.
So, do you know when these authorised engineers are usually appointed?
At design stage, I would assume. It was a kind of newer role that was brought in.
Right, so you're about to tell me about a newer role.
I don't think authorised engineers has been around for the last 20 years. I think it's more of a kind of a newer role.
Thank you very much. Now, the next couple of pages, you talk about innovative design solutions, and I'm not going to ask you about that again, but I want to come to when you first became involved with I'll just call it the new hospital. Otherwise, I'll get mixed up between Queen Elizabeth and University and so on. And that you start to deal with on page 4 of your statement. What you say there is that the initial scope of your instruction was simply to determine the viability of providing 6 air changes per hour in particular areas.
Yes.
Is that really all you were asked to do initially?
Initially, yes. It was to ascertain the existing air change rates and then determine the viability of increasing the existing air change rates to 6 and what impact that would have on the ductwork distribution. Right.
Well, let me ask you a couple of things then before we get into the details, which may help us a little bit later on, more general kind. Time to time, we see in your statement the initials CIBSE.
The Chartered Institution of Building Services Engineers.
Right. And is that an organisation that issues guidance on certain issues?
Yes.
I see. So when you refer to that, you're referring to a professional body that you're familiar with, is that right?
It's industry design guidance.
Industry design, thank you. Another set of initials, now I think I know what this is, but I'll ask you anyway. The initials H and V crop up as a source of information. What does that refer to, H and V in capitals? Can you remember?
It'll be heating and ventilation, I'm assuming.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's not worry. If you can't remember, we'll pick it up later on. And can I ask you another general question, which we're going to come back to later? And this is about the consequences of changing an air change rate in a room. Does that have any consequences on the ducting, or for the ducting that is deployed in the whole system?
Yes, significant.
Well, when you say it's significant, can you just give us an idea of what we're talking about here? What happens if you need more air changes to the duct sizing?
Your airflow rate increases. So, for instance, if you had a 30 litres a second airflow rate, you might need a 100 mil ductwork diameter. And if you increase to 90 litres a second, you might need a 200 or 250 diameter duct. You could do it with smaller duct, but it increases velocity and pressure drop. So the more air you put down a smaller duct, the higher the pressure loss and higher the velocity is within that duct.
Okay. I'll probably need to get you to come back to a couple of these points, but just in terms of duct size, can this be significantly different if you're trying to avoid these issues of pressure drop and so on?
Yes. There's other parameters like noise as well. You need to take cognizance of.
Right. So the duct that you would need if you were trying to put in 6 air changes without problems of pressure drop and noise, would that be likely a different duct size to one for, say, 2.5 air changes now?
Yes.
Significantly different or just marginal?
Significantly, I would imagine.
I mean, is it a linear relationship? If I'm following what you're saying, Mr. Lambert, if we consider the difference between, let's say, 4 air changes an hour and 6 air changes an hour, if I follow you, the diameter of a duct, assuming it's circular in section, would the relationship between 4 and 6 be reflected in the relationship of the increase in size, or would it not be related in a linear way?
Cross-sectional area.
Sorry?
The cross-sectional area would get larger.
Right, so it's the cross-sectional area that's the critical
Yes.
thing.
Yeah.
And would that be a linear relationship or not?
Yes.
It would be a linear relationship.
Yep. More air. If you'll be trying to maintain a certain noise level within the ductwork distribution relative to where the ductwork is installed within the building. So if the ductwork was over a corridor, you could run it at a higher velocity. Whereas if you're running it above a bedroom, you try and keep the noise, the velocity down in the duct, so you don't get disturbance to the occupant. So you might be able to go from 4 to 6 air changes in certain sections of the ductwork. But it would, as you increase the air volume, you would increase the ductwork size, typically.
Right, and one of the reasons for increasing the ductwork size is to avoid unacceptable noise.
Yes.
Right. Sorry, Mr. Connor.
And the ductwork would typically be installed in a ceiling void, but in the kind of buildings we're looking at.
Yes.
So presumably you then need space in the ceiling void for whatever size of ductwork you're talking about.
Yes.
Thank you. Just while we're on noise, I think I'm right in understanding, am I, that decibels, which is the usual measure of noise, although there are lots of technical versions on simple decibels, operate on what's called a logarithmic scale.
Yes.
That's something you're aware of.
Yes.
So if you see 2 decibels and 4 decibels and think there's not much difference in noise between them, you'd be wrong, is that right?
Yes.
Is there quite a significant difference?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if we can come back to your statement, the next name that crops up on page 4 of your statement is the name Zutec, which you'll see in the middle of that page. were you aware of what that was supposed to be, Zutec?
Digital record system for the hospital.
Digital record system.
Yes.
And were you given access to that?
Yes.
In fact, was that your main source of information?
Yes.
I'll come back to other sources you use later, but was that where you got most of your information?
Yes.
Were you provided at that initial stage with any material about the contract between the parties for the building of the hospital or anything of that kind?
No.
Or the design process other than what you got from Zutec?
No.
Thank you. That first section also tells us who instructed you and who you were involved with. So I'm keen to understand this. You say there you had an initial discussion with two people, Mary Ann Kane and Alan Gallagher.
Yes.
Is that what you recall?
Yes.
And when you say an initial discussion, was this a meeting, a phone call? What was it?
I was from memory, I was in the estates office actually speaking to somebody else, and they asked me to pop through and have a chat with them after I'd finished with the other person.
So you think you were maybe in the estates office for some other reason?
Yes.
And you were asked to pop through and chat to these people?
Yes.
Ms. Kane and Mr. Gallagher?
Yes.
And so what were you told?
They were concerned that the air change rates were lower than 6, and they didn't know what they were, and they wanted to determine the viability of increasing to 6.
Were you given any more detail, or was that it?
That was it.
After that initial meeting, you recorded here that you dealt with a Mr. Powery, is that so?
Yes.
So did you communicate thereafter with Ms. Kane or Mr. Gallagher?
Not from memory. Apart from issuing the reports, I think I was mainly Ian Powery I dealt with, and Colin Purden as well. Colin Purden assisted me to access Zutec and help me find documents on Zutec if I couldn't find them.
Was that easy to do?
No.
Why not?
It was clunky. It was where you thought you'd find information, there wasn't information, and where you wouldn't expect to find information was the information you were looking for. That.
Right. So it was a database that so you would interrogate the database and expect to find X, and it wasn't there.
Yes.
But it was somewhere else.
Sometimes.
And Mr. Purden, who presumably was familiar with it, was helping you with that. Is that right?
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt. Your initial conversation with Mary Ann King and Alan Gallagher, you said in the estates office, I take it's on the Queen Elizabeth campus.
Yes.
Right. They were concerned about air change rates not achieving 6 air changes an hour. Did they, at that stage, identify where they were talking about?
It was Ward 2B and Ward 2A.
Right. Two wards specifically. Sorry, Mr. Collins.
Yep. Well, I'll just follow that through. We know that the way the work was subsequently done, and we'll look at these documents shortly, was that you prepared a report for Ward 2B and a report for Ward 2A. First question is, were you specifically asked to do 2 separate reports?
I can't remember.
And is there any particular reason why 2B came before 2A in chronological date?
It might have been because of the information I found on Zutec related to Ward 2B before I found information relating to Ward 2A.
But you weren't specifically asked, please do 2B first?
Not that I remember, no.
I'm going to ask you to look at that in a moment. But on page 5 of your statement, you record that having had this initial discussion, told of a concern about air change rates not being at 6, it appears that additional items were added to the job you were asked to do. Now, you deal with that in a general paragraph in the middle of that statement where you say, during the analysis process, we were asked to include additional aspects, and then you say what these were. Can I understand from you, please, how did that happen? You've been sent off to see what are the air change rates, can you get them up to 6? That was your initial brief.
Yes.
So how did it come to be that you were being asked other things? Did someone get in touch? Were you called in for meetings? How did it happen? Do you remember?
From memory, it was by telephone. As I was doing the analysis, what we discovered during the analysis raised concerns regarding the suitability of the environment.
So were you prompting a telephone call, or was the call coming from Mr. Powery or someone else?
I would have most likely made Mr. Powery aware. There was other things regarding the actual equipment and the ventilation systems in general that we were concerned with.
Yeah. Well, we'll try and pick up on these as we go through the reports. I'm just trying to understand the process at the moment, if I can.
Yeah.
So you have the initial brief. You start to think about other issues that concern you. So you think you got in touch with who? Would it be Mr. Powery?
Yeah, I'd imagine so.
And what was the result of that? Did he instruct you to do something else?
No observations. We were also asked to have a look at not just the ductwork distribution. From memory, it was the ductwork. We were asked to look at what impact would it have on the ductwork size if you increased air change rates. And then we became concerned about the air handling units, filtration, and other elements in the system. So he asked us to include them within the report also.
Right. So that's why you say here you were asked to comment on the impact on the systems generally,
Yes.
as well as give an idea of what would be needed, and also record any other observations that you had on the existing systems, which were things that you say you were concerned about.
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's look at, I'll come to 2A shortly, but we'll get lost otherwise. So let's look at 2B first, because that was the first report in strict chronological order. Just before I do that, can I ask you a question that was raised with you on page 7 of your statement? You've already told us you didn't have contract documents or design documents or anything like that. You just had Zutec.
Yep.
And you're asked a question on page 7 whether you were able to ascertain the design philosophy that lay beneath the ventilation systems. And you were just looking at 2B and 2A. And you say there that you thought you could work out the probable design intent. Can you just help us to understand what you mean by that phrase? What is it that you reckon you could work out from looking at the material you had?
Low air change rates and the air cascade arrangement within the board.
Sorry, low air change rates. I just missed what you said after that.
Or the direction of air movement.
Right.
The air cascade from one space to another.
Air cascade.
Yes. Yeah.
And was
Do you want maybe just to
Yes.
tease that out a little bit?
I'll ask you 2 questions about that, and you tell me if I'm getting this completely upside down. There's one issue that can arise depending on the kind of ward you're looking at, which is what should the movement of air be between the single room where the patient is and the area out with that, the corridor and so on. Now, is that what you mean by direction of movement?
Yes.
And is that something, and we'll no doubt come back to it in more detail, but is that something that cropped up as you started to look into this system?
Yes.
And what was the issue?
I thought the air was going in the wrong direction, towards the patient rather than away from the patient, from the corridor.
And why, for that group of patients, was it going in the wrong direction?
Immunocompromised patients.
Right. So it was going in rather than out. Yeah. And when you use the phrase air cascade, can you just tell us what you mean by air cascade, just so we're all clear we're talking about the same thing?
It's like a theatre. If you think about a surgical theatre, you try to put air into the theatre and then you push the air into the adjacencies so it cascades from clean to less dirty out towards the main hospital corridor rather than pulling dirty air towards the patient.
When you were making a judgment as to air change rates and the flow of air,
Yeah.
what are you testing that against?
SHTM guidance.
Sorry.
SHTM guidance.
Right. So you are applying the recommendations of SHTM 0301 and the table we find towards the end of that.
Yep.
And you're contrasting that with what you're finding on site or what you're finding in the ZUTEC system.
Both.
Both. Right. Thank you.
From memory, we questioned what the Shallian word was utilised patient group wise because it wasn't clear from the drawings.
Sorry, say that again.
The Shallian word
Uh-huh.
in Word 2A, we queried what the bedroom use was, if it was general bedrooms or if it was for new patients.
So you were asking these questions
Yes.
on the site?
Once we got into the analysis, well, further into the analysis.
Right. And when you talk about the analysis, you've got information on ZUTEC, which I take it is design drawings,
Record drawings.
record drawings.
Yep.
And you're on site speaking to staff?
Estates. Yep.
Speaking to estates. Can you remember who you spoke to on the ground? Was it Ian Powery or somebody else?
It'll be Ian Powery
Would be
and Colin Purden as well,
Ian
I'd
Powery.
imagine.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Cole.
No, this is helpful, Mr. Lambert. Apologies, this is going quite slowly at the moment. We'll get through it later. Still sticking to page 7, you were asked, what difficulties did you encounter in getting the information that you thought you wanted, if I can paraphrase, in order to do the job you were being asked to do? Now, you've then listed a number, lack of definitive design, because you could just get what was in ZUTEC, is that right?
Yes.
And you say here, as fitted drawings were deemed to be incomplete and inaccurate. What's the problem there?
Well, the as-fitted record drawing is a layout of the ventilation. Well, from what I was looking for was a layout of the ventilation systems and the airflow rates and things associated with the installation on site. And the information was incomplete and inaccurate. And some information you would expect to find on the drawings wasn't on the drawings, which made my analysis more difficult to do.
And you say in the same paragraph, you needed to relate third-party commissioning data. Now here comes H&V from H&V.
They're a commissioning specialist.
Ah, right. Thank you. So H&V is a company which does ventilation commissioning. Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you. Did you have to go and get data from them, or was it provided to you?
It was on ZUTEC.
It was on ZUTEC. I see. So what you're doing is piecing together the jigsaw. Is that right? You've got some information from H&V material and some information from the drawings.
Yes.
Tell me if I'm wrong when I ask you these questions.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what made it harder to do the analysis, because you had to think, how would you get the information? It's not on the drawing, so where else would you get it? So you go and find the balancing sheets or the air handling sheets and try and piece the puzzle together.
Yep. Also at the foot of that page, you talk about discrepancies between airflow rates stated by the AHU, that's air handling unit.
Yes.
Manufacturer, H&V commissioning data, so that's what they recorded, the designer and your own calculations.
Yeah.
So should they all say the same thing, or?
Yes.
And what kind of discrepancies were you noting?
They were in the report from memory.
Right, okay. Well, perhaps when we come to the report, hold that thought and we'll pick it up then. And then you noted, going on to page 8 of your statement, there wasn't much technical literature with regard to some of the devices. And also the final comment there that you needed to actually go to the air handling unit manufacturer at points. Is that right?
Yes.
What did you have to go? Why did you have to go to them?
To establish what the capabilities of the equipment installed in terms of airflow rates and pressure drops.
Okay. Thank you.
And to determine what spare capacity and things were in the systems.
Yeah. So that was material that you didn't have available to you from Zutec?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, you asked a general question on page 8, and I don't think I need to dwell on that too much. I think the point is being made that you use words like assumptions and so on at various points in your report. But what I'm interested in is what you say there. You say concerns regarding the ventilation systems became more apparent. Now, whose concerns were these?
Ours, mine.
And the urgency to complete your findings and issue the reports was duly emphasized. So just tell us what was happening there.
From memory, as we raised further concerns regarding the systems, the design of the systems and the installation of the systems, NHS estates became more concerned regarding what we were finding, and they wanted the reports back as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Thank you. And when you say NHS estates, is that the same two individuals that you've mentioned, or is this different people?
No, this will be Ian Powery.
Ian Powery.
Yep.
Thank you.
Right, so if I'm just picking that up, as you communicated to, this is before the state, before the delivering your formal report, but in the course of communicating with Ian Powery, he became more concerned by reason of what you were telling him about what you were finding.
Yes.
Sorry, just so I'm keeping up.
I don't think they appreciated the extent of the problems at the time until we started doing our analysis,
Right.
and then they became more worried.
Thank you.
Now, I'm going to ask you about your Ward 2B report in a moment, which is in Bundle 6, document 33. But just pausing just before I do that, just so we get all the paperwork right. When you were being asked about these matters, you were asked about your Ward 2B report, correct? And your Ward 2A report. And you then drew the attention of the questioner to the fact that you had produced later this lead consultant brief, is that correct?
Yes.
And then there was an addendum to that, which is something we can pick up. And I think we'll leave over what's in the lead consultant brief until we come. Yep. And everybody can look at it at that time, if you don't mind. The Ward 2B, if you look at page 9 of your statement, where did you get the understanding of what patients were to be in Ward 2B?
The drawings initially, or the record drawings on Zutec.
And you also asked what you thought the ventilation requirements for that group of patients was. That's also on page 9. What did you think was required?
10 air changes and positively pressurised.
So positively pressurised, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the process process earlier whereby the air flows out from the patient room into the surrounding area.
Yes.
Because of the nature of the patients that are in the room.
Yep.
Thank you. Now, as I say, I'll come back to your consultant's brief, because we need to understand where your job started and where it finished. So we'll come there. On page 10, you asked what your initial thoughts were when you started to look at the ventilation rates. What was the first thing that came to your mind as an issue?
Well, the existing air change rates were abnormally low, even for a general bedroom ward. And the air cascade was apparently going in the wrong direction.
Apparently going in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And when you say low compared to a general ward, is that against, not against a figure of 10, but against a different figure?
6.
6. And that's what you would have expected for a general ward, is that right?
In terms of air change rates, it was low, relative to a general ward or a single bedroom. The differential pressure's different from a neutropenic to a single room, but it can be, in a single room, a general room, it can be neutral or negative, whereas in neutropenic it needs to be positive. You need to make sure the airflow is from the bedroom to the adjacency.
Yep. And could you work out why in a ward dealing with, as you saw it anyway, patients with a particular need, the ventilation system had been designed in the way it was?
No.
I think, in fairness to you, on page 10 and going on to page 11, you speculate as to reasons why that might have been. Are any of these statements that you make there, can I just check, are they based on particular material that you had? Is it just you having a stab at it?
I answered these queries, or these questions, and then I actually, retrospectively, had a look at some of the inquiry documents in more detail, not regarding my matters, regarding other documents, and I think I know the answer now. That it was signed off as a variation to the design process. I didn't know that at the time I wrote these answers.
Okay, well, I'm going to put something to you later on in your evidence and allow you to comment on it then. So with His Lordship's permission, I'll simply move past that point for the moment. But just touching briefly on the things that you're touching on there, you say that smaller air change rates can save money? Is that correct?
Smaller ductwork, smaller fan units, smaller grills, everything's smaller.
Yeah. And then you'd found on the drawings reference to the purpose of these rooms. So is there anything in that would have led you to assume that low air change rates would be provided for rooms of that kind?
No.
Okay. We'll come back to this when we come to Ward 2A, but just so the reference isn't too obscure, at the foot of page 10, you talk about dirty extract systems being integrated within the Ward 2A system. Is that a specific issue that you found in 2A?
Yes.
Right. We'll come back to that when we deal with your 2A report then, please. And His Lordship asked you about SHTM 0301. Is that a document you're familiar with?
Yes.
And have there been various iterations of it over the years?
Yes.
I'll come back to that as well. So you found low air change rates, you found air possibly moving in a direction you hadn't expected. At the foot of page 11, you touch for the first time in your statement on another issue which you describe as resilience with regard to spare capacities. Now, can you just tell us what you mean by that? The very foot of page 11, AHU selection.
Well, there's there's a few problems with the resilience.
Right, well, let's take them, give me one first.
There's only one air handling unit with one supply fan and one extract fan. So if one fan breaks, you don't have a supply and extract system.
And why is that a problem?
Because the occupants can't open their windows for fresh air, disregarding positive, negative air change rates. Building regulations require every person in every occupied space to be afforded with 8 litres per second fresh air from outside. So if your fan doesn't work, or there's something wrong with your air handling kit, there's no other means of affording fresh air to the occupants.
You introduced the idea of opening a window, Mr. Lambert. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying, I mean, you recognize that some rooms in a hospital will not have openable windows.
Yes.
Because if you do have openable windows, you can't maintain the recommended air change rate.
Yep.
Therefore, the mechanical ventilation system must do at least as well as the building regulation requirement.
Yes.
Have I picked that up correctly?
Yes. You'd always need to provide an occupancy level of fresh air regardless of the facility.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't open the window, if you can't provide natural ventilation, regardless of the room type, the room use, classroom, any building, you'd need to provide 8 litres per second fresh air per occupant.
And you're being asked about resilience, and you draw attention to the fact there's only one, is it one fan for supply and one for extract?
Yes.
And the point, again, if I'm following you, the point is that if for any reason one of these fans fails, you have no supply.
I would imagine so. You'd need to check with the manufacturer. I would imagine if your extract system doesn't work, you might still be able to run the supply, but I don't know. I'd need to check how it's controlled.
Right.
But normally that would be the case. If it's a failure, it would be a failure.
Right. So that's one of your resilience concerns.
Yes.
Yeah, was there another one about spare capacity?
Yes.
And just tell us what you were finding about spare capacity.
Once we'd spoke to the air handling manufacturer, we determined that the units were designed on 100% air duty. So if you needed 100 litres a second supply air, they'd selected the nearest fan suitable for 100 litres per second. And by doing so, it didn't take cognizance of the system becoming dirty.
Right. I think we just need to work through this a little more slowly. If you do a calculation of the ability of the fan to perform its function when completely new, it produces a particular figure. Is that right?
Yes.
But you were telling us about it becoming, or the system becoming dirty. Now, does that have an impact on what the fan can then achieve?
Well, you design the ventilation system to provide a certain amount of air quantity come through the air outlet and inlet, the extract. So as you operate the system, you'll get dust and debris on your grills, on your ductwork, on the dampers used in the ductwork to control airflow rate, just general dirt accumulation on the distribution system. And as your filters are there to filter the incoming air and the outgoing air. So again, deterioration to it's a cross-sectional area again. They'll become dirtier and they'll get clogged, and it'll reduce the airflow through the system. And it increases the pressure drop on the system, how hard the fan needs to push the resistance.
So what are you meant to do then when picking your fan?
Well, your fan, you'd have spare capacity so that as your system gets dirtier, your fan can increase in speed, ideally automatically, so it maintains the set duty that you're looking for.
And did you find an issue about spare capacity
Yes.
when you were looking at the systems you were interrogating?
You'd also allow spare capacity for future resilience in terms of if you want to increase the number of wards or you want to increase the air change rates, So there was no future capacity, and there was inadequate capacity in terms of, well, it's difficult to say there was inadequate capacity in terms of the system becoming dirty. You'd need to do more analysis on that, but it could impact it further. It make your air changes less than they already were.
Okay. Well, I think you probably told me about two different things in the course of that answer. So let me see if I can unpick that. You've told me about building in to the capacity of the kit, if I just use a layman's terms for it, the ability to increase its workload if you suddenly decide to do something a little bit different or more. Is that the one thing you were telling me about?
Yes.
Say you wanted to increase air change rates or something of that kind. And then the second thing is you're supposed to design to reflect the fact that the system will become dirty. And I'm assuming that's even with appropriate maintenance.
Yes.
And were you finding issues over these points when you were investigating Ward 2B?
Yes.
Good. Can I ask you to look then at page 12 of your statement? It's a point here. You didn't think the air terminals were going to be suitable to be used for increasing airflow rates. Then you say there was dubiety with regards to the appropriateness of supply air terminals. What are you meaning there?
So the air terminals didn't appear suitable to increase the amount of air going through the terminal in terms of pressure drop and noise level. And in terms of the appropriateness, I think I'd be referring to the use of an induction unit.
Right. Just tell us why that's an issue.
It's got a perforated inlet for the extract path.
And why is that a problem?
It's be hard to clean.
Now, we'll come to that, but am I right in thinking that the perforations are on the, well, what have sometimes been called chilled beam units just for ease?
Yes.
Is that right? That where the perforations are to be found?
Yes.
We'll come to them a little later. And you talk about thermal wheels, which we'll come to as well. And then you said H&V, so this is not your record, stated that air handling Unit 24 fan chamber was full of water. Seemed an odd thing to find.
It was a note on the commissioning sheet.
All right. So this is not something you found. This is something you just picked up in passing from the commissioning engineers.
It was more to make sure that it was no longer full of water. Because if someone's been in there and commissioned the system, they wouldn't empty it of water. They would just record it and give it back to the contractor. It was to make sure that it's checked and picked up.
Right. So that's why you mentioned it in your report, so that the States people knew about it.
Yep.
Thank you. And then you're asked again on page 12 about other guidance, and you mentioned this CIBSE ventilation guidance, and this about maximum ductwork velocities, and that's all to do with your noise generation issue, is it?
Yes.
And then DW144 ductwork specification, what's that?
It's how you build the ductwork, how the ductwork's manufactured relative to different velocities and pressure classifications for ductwork. So if it's a higher airspeed and a higher pressure drop in the system, you need to manufacture the ductwork relative to that.
So what is there any significance? You make a point there that the ductwork was designed and installed relative to a low pressure Class A system and not in accordance with the pressures within the commissioning records. Can you help us understand that point, please, for lay people?
So within the ZooTech information from memory, there's a note saying it's designed and installed relative to a low class system, so under a certain pressure drop within the system. Whereas the commissioning records suggested to me it should have been manufactured to a higher pressure classification. I think that, by my own opinion, they didn't realise the pressure drop in the system was going to be so high. So when it was installed, it was higher than they initially anticipated at design stage. And that pushed it into a higher classification.
And why is that a problem for the system?
So if you're working under a higher classification of system, it would be different jointing methods. You might want intermediate stay bars in the ductwork to keep it rigid and things like that.
That has an effect on the need to create a physical structure that can cope with
weight. You can think about weight in a natural building structure.
Right. Okay.
Could you give me that? It's entirely my fault. Could you give me that again under relation to ductwork? You take me through it again, Mr. Lambert.
So when you're designing a ventilation system, DW144 it's a table essentially with velocities and pressure drops within the system.
No, can I stop you there? Pressure drop is
the resistance in the system from the fan unit, from the inlet, through the fan, through all the equipment, to the outlet, or the furthest outlet. It's an index circuit. So if I can get air to there from the fan, I'll both get air to there, because that resistance is harder for me to get to. And that's how you calculate your pressure drop.
Pressure drop is the loss of
resistance within the system. Yep. So,
and every system of necessity will have a pressure drop.
Flow rate and pressure drop, that's how you select your fan units. So it'll give you that amount of air at that resistance.
Right. Now, you said they hadn't anticipated the pressure drop. Can you just help me on that?
From memory, for classification in A, I think for a supply system's up to 500 pascals. So the H&V documents, the commissioning documents will say the design flow rate and the design pressure drop. So the design pressure drops, we say 400 at design stage. But when the person from H&V commissioned the system, he found that it was 700 or 800 actual system resistance. So the resistance in the system was significantly higher installed than it was anticipated to be at design stage. And again, that would impact your fan selections.
And so the fan was not sufficiently effective, strong.
Well, no, the ductwork. It's the ductwork. What conveys the air from the fan unit to the terminals wasn't manufactured to suit that resistance in the ductwork structurally.
Right. Sorry, Mr. Cullen.
Thank you. Can I just make the point now that if you feel at any stage in my questions you need to look at your actual report, I will do that at various points, but if you feel I'm asking you a question that you can't answer, please just tell us, and that will be, I'm sure, fine. So having dealt with the ductwork, you then touch on heat recovery devices. Now that's where thermal wheels come in and other possible options, is that correct?
Yes.
And what you're recording at the top of page 13, what CIBSE guidance says about the risk of cross leakage with the use of a thermal wheel device.
Yeah.
And that, as I understand it, is important because you have dirty air and clean air. And the question is there any chance of there being a leakage from the one to the other? Is that correct?
Leakage and carryover.
Thank you. Fine. When we look at your report, you have an executive summary on page 1 of 16, section 1.01, which will obviously summarize things that we'll come back to in a little more detail. And you say that you found a discrepancy with the selection of the air handling units. And you asked, well, what was the discrepancy in your statement? And you say abnormally low air change rates, no appropriate resilience with spare capacities. Well, you've told us about that. You say did not facilitate ongoing maintenance regimes without undermining patient comfort and safety. What's that about?
Getting into the bedrooms to clean them.
And is that the chilled beam unit?
Oh, no, sorry. That's terminals. But in terms of their handling unit,
Right.
you wouldn't be able to turn off the system to be able to clean it because the occupants need 24/7 fresh air. So it's not as if you could turn it off for a day and clean filters and clean the inside of the unit out.
And then you mentioned clean filters, which I've already asked you about, so I won't ask you about that again. And in the next section, you talk about an assumption of 125% capacity and where you got that. Where did you get that from?
From memory, out of Zutec.
So is that what, according to Zutec, should have been provided?
Yes.
And was it provided?
No.
And how did you work out that there wasn't 125% capacity?
Using H&V commissioning data and information from the manufacturer.
And when you say information from the manufacturer, is that information that you got or were you provided with it?
That I got.
You got. And then at the foot of page 13, you're talking about the 100% capacity, which I think we've touched on. And you asked just over the page on page 14, how important is the spare capacity? Well, how important is the spare capacity in your view, Mr. Lambert? The 25% over the 100%?
Very important.
And why is that?
It gives you future flexibility. Deterioration of the system. I would never design a system without any spare capacity in it whatsoever. And if that's been offered or stated as something that I was going to give you and I didn't give you it, there's a detrimental effect to the entire system because you can't retrospectively add it very easily. If your system's been designed on 100% and you want to change it to 125%, it's going to be very difficult to do so.
Right, that's maybe a general point. By their nature, once you put an air handling system into a building which then is occupied, is it easy to change it?
No.
And is that just because of the physical works that are needed?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert, please correct me if I'm wrong about this. When you talk about 25% additional capacity, is it, and let's say you're the objective is to produce a system that's producing, let's say, 10 air changes an hour. Now, is it as simple as saying that if the guidance requires 10 air changes an hour, you should design in order to achieve 12.5? I mean, is it as simple as that?
Essentially, yeah.
Right, thank you.
And the 25% spare capacity, you found reference to that in Zutec, did you?
Yes.
So that's the question I asked you earlier, so apologies for repeating it, that Zutec said it should have been 125% and you didn't find that.
Correct.
And the net result of all of this, was it going to be feasible in Ward 2B to increase the air changes to 6?
No.
And did you measure the air changes in Ward 2B?
No. I utilised H&V commissioning data.
And what kind of figures for air changes were being recorded for Ward 2B?
I refer to my report.
Of course. I don't need a
Between-
precise figure, just a
2.5 to
About
3,
2.5.
2.8, that from memory.
But I'm going to come back to some of these later for this reason, that in your lead consultant's brief that you subsequently prepared, did you set out what you thought there ought to be provided in a ward of that kind?
Not in 2B.
Not in 2B,
No.
but sorry, you're quite correct. The brief was for 2A. Is that right?
The original brief was 6 year changes
Yeah.
for both wards.
I'm confusing you by reference to different documents, so we'll stop doing that for the moment. But what you've been asked in the course of the questioning, well, what do you think should have been provided? And you say, well, look at my lead consultant's brief, although that was for 2A, not for 2B.
Sorry. Yeah. 10 year changes, 10 pascals positive pressure.
And you've already said that that's what you thought should have been provided for 2B.
Yes.
Thank you. I think in your report there are a lot of figures and records of what you found and analysis of what size the ductwork was and so forth. And you'll be glad to know I'm not going to ask you about that. And I'm not going to ask you about clean filters again, because I've taken that from you. But the next topic you deal with in your statement is this question of thermal wheels. Now, the inquiry has heard quite a lot of evidence about ventilation, but if you can just tell us briefly, what's a thermal wheel?
It's a rotary heat recovery device that takes heat off the extract path and transfers it onto the supply air path, or the fresh air going to the building.
And what's the point of having one?
Energy efficiency.
And are there other means other than thermal wheels of doing something similar?
Yes.
And on page 16 of your statement, you deal with the issue of cross-contamination. Just explain to us how that works.
Yeah, well, you can get, it's like a brush that goes round the wheel. So you can get leakage from from the extract path to the fresh air path. And it's also a membrane that's on the wheel. So you can get carryover. So it's air leakage and carryover would be my concerns.
And you say that I think earlier you quoted the CIBSE guidance of a 1 to 10% risk of cross leakage. You seem to have been in touch, according to page 16, with the air handling unit manufacturer about the thermal wheel.
Yes.
Did you get any information about the air paths from that source?
It wouldn't provide a complete segregation of air paths. That's what we would advise from the manufacturer.
Right. Now, you say in the middle of page 16 you've come across thermal wheels before, but you tend to suggest a different device. Is that right?
Yes.
What do you suggest?
Counterflow heat exchangers.
Say again.
A counterflow heat exchanger.
A counterflow heat exchanger. Do they have the same issue about potential leakage?
No.
So you record your view on page 16 that you wouldn't recommend the use of a thermal wheel because of the risk of some level of cross-contamination.
Yeah.
Is that right?
If there's any risk of cross-contamination or carryover, that, in my personal opinion, I wouldn't use one, no. This was something that was discussed with the authorised engineer by memory when I issued my report. They were of the opinion that thermal wheels were suitable because they were noted in the SHT-M03. But I disagreed and stuck with what was in the report and said, well, I think it should be risk assessed relative to the use of the facility.
Yeah. Now, I think you may be picking that point up at the top of page 17 of your statement, where you're asked whether thermal wheels comply with SHTM 0301, and you say, well, maybe, but you still wouldn't recommend them. Is that your position?
Yes.
And that's because,
I would argue that any potential risk associated with cross-contamination and ultimately patient safety should be completely mitigated wherever it's possible to do so. So if you've got another heat exchanger, although it be it slightly less efficient, then it should have been considered or installed.
yeah. Thank you. Now, we go on in your statement at page 17 to talk about cooling devices, and I don't think I need to get into a debate with you about whether these are technically chilled beam units or comfort units or whatever we want to call them, but whatever units are, they perform a similar function. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is that by drawing in air over a chilled water system and then pushing it out again?
Yes. Heating and cooling coils.
So, say again?
Heating and cooling coils.
Heating and cooling coils. And you're recorded on page 17 simply saying, well, what I saw was a more compact version of a chilled beam.
Yes.
But in technical terms, does it make any difference?
Fundamentally the same operation.
Thank you. And where were these units to be found?
Within Ward 2A bedrooms and within Ward, the BMT ward and daycare. And in some of the other, I think it's in some of the other offices and consulting rooms in Ward 2B as well. I think I know that.
Yeah, I think you asked that question at the top of page 18 of your statement, and you say where were, and you say they were in the day ward and day stay ward of 2B and other rooms of 2B.
Yeah.
Now, do you know what was in the contract exchanges about the use of chilled beams?
No.
Is there guidance about the use of chilled beams in SHTM 0301?
Yes.
And has that changed?
No.
Why would you not recommend them?
Cleanliness. Cleanliness.
Cleanliness. Oh, this is your perforated sections point.
Yep.
And I think you also make a point on page 18 about access for cleaning.
Yep.
Thank you. Now, can I just ask you to look at paragraph 4.03 of your 2B report? That's at page 9 of 16. Have you got that? Page, bundle page number.
The bundle page is 666.
666. 686.
Well, according to what I have available, we're in bundle 6, and 4.03 is to be found on page 666.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about this decibel point, because it crops up in the second paragraph under supply air terminals. And you say at a primary air supply volume of 40 litres per second, module sound level is stated as being 28 dBA. The upper limit of 55 litres per second, module sound level is 36 dBA. In noise terms, is that quite a big difference?
Reasonable, yep.
Thank you.
It'll be above. I'm trying to distinguish because obviously the bedroom, the DBA limit within a bedroom is lower. Well, it's lower than 36, it's above 28. So I'm assuming I'm trying to show or demonstrate that if you increase the airflow, you're going to be above the guidance limit for a bedroom noise level. So thereby it wouldn't be viable to increase the supply air volume going through the terminal.
And apart from making more noise because you're trying to shovel more air through the same ducting, does it have any other impact if you try and increase the rate through these units in that room?
On that example, it almost doubles the resistance or the pressure drop through the terminal. And the impact of that would find its way back to the fan unit. So it would put another 60 pascals resistance onto their handling unit and thereby decrease the amount of air that can provide or reduce the spare capacity.
And you asked about the cooling devices, and I don't think I need to ask you about that. You've dealt with dirty filters. Do you think the question of coping with dirty filters, which I think in fairness to you, you define in your statement as dirty condition having regard to normal maintenance processes. From what you saw, had that been taken into account in the design that you were looking at?
No.
Thank you very much. So you recorded an air change number of 2.33, and you've been asked whether you thought that was compliant with what you'd expect to see. And what's your answer to that?
No. It would be no for a general ward.
No for a general ward.
That's on the basis that you would expect 6 for a general ward.
Yes.
And you've already dealt with not expecting to find negative pressure, you were expecting to find positive pressure.
Yes.
Sure.
Although I don't think you would expect to find positive pressure on a general ward, but you would on a neutropenic ward.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when you were looking at 2B, you were anticipating that what you would find was positively pressurized rooms.
Yes.
Thank you. I can just ask you a slightly different topic. Can you turn to page 24 of your statement? You're talking there about supply and extract air terminals. And you make a point.
Can I ask just a very a basic question? I'm not quite sure if I understand what an air terminal is, unless it is the grill in front of the point of supply into the room.
Yes, that's an air terminal, supply air terminal. One in the ceiling next to the light.
Oh, right. Excellent. Thank you.
Sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Connell.
So what you're saying at that section of your report is if you increase the amount of air going through the terminals that were there at the time you found them, could cause discomfort and extra resistance, which is the point that you've just dealt with.
When you size a supply air grill, you size it for a throw. So the size of the outlet or the size of the outlets and the direction of airflow is relative to where we'd be seating or walls and things like that. So you don't want to hit the wall and it to come down and cause a downdraft and things.
Right.
So if you've sized that for 2 metre throw that way, a 2 metre throw that way, and then I double the amount of air, it wouldn't be exactly the same, but it could go 4 metres or 5 metres each direction. It could cause discomfort from downdrafts and things like that.
Right. So if you'd sized it to go 2 meters, but there was a wall just after the 2 meters and you put more through it, it was going to hit the wall and do something.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask you about the last section of that statement where you say extract grills do not appear to have been appropriately sized. They seem to have been selected to suit the sealing grid size in lieu of the extraction rate. What's the point there that you're making?
Well, I'm assuming what they've got a 600 grid, so they've just put a 600 extract grill in, rather than sizing the extract terminal or the inlet size, the cross-sectional free area of the inlet relative to the air duty you're trying to extract. And what you'd ideally want to have a pull from your extract, so you've got a face velocity, so you can suck in air, whereas it's been completely oversized, so it would have less face velocity. I've noted there that grill size would be suitable for 500 litres a second, whereas from memory it was doing 47 or something like that.
My fault. I'm not quite sure if I follow that. Give me that again, Mr. Lambert.
So instead of sizing the extract grill relative to the room extract rate, which was say 47, they had a ceiling tile, so they thought we'll just put a ceiling tile grill in there. That's the full ceiling tile size. It's easier to install, quicker to install.
Right.
And it was capable of doing 500 litres a second rather than significantly less, or 10 times less here.
Right. So the problem is, in fact, the
Face velocity. So it wouldn't pull you.
it's too large.
Too large.
I've got
Too
that
much
right.
area. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
It'd be the same if you oversize a supply air grill. It would just dump air straight down rather than distribute it into the room.
Right.
They essentially weren't sized.
I need to do these on 2A later.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, the way your report is structured, you've had an executive summary at the start, you've then gone through a lot of the technical detail, and then you provide a summary. Although you provide the summary, I think, before then going on to various system alteration proposals. I'm just wanting to make sure that we understand why the report is structured in that way. And is that answered on page 25 of your statement when you're asked about the options at section 5 of the report, and you say, well, what I was setting out there were options to increase air changes to 6, but not to do anything about anything else.
For Ward 2B, yes.
For Ward 2B.
Yes.
That's what you were doing when you went on to options.
Yes.
You were just looking at that one issue.
Yes.
And can I just ask you the general question? Why were you just doing that? Because your initial brief had tended to encourage you to focus very narrowly, and then you were being told to report on other things.
We were asked to look, well, during the process of the report of 2A, we were asked to look at what would be required, or how would we make the systems more suitable relative to use by a neutropenic patient? How would we do it, essentially? And it wasn't deemed viable from Ward to do that in Ward 2B, from memory. And I think that's why we retrospectively added in the addendum to the appointment brief. That's why that got put in at the end. And it was essentially leave what you've got and improve air quality and air change rates for Ward 2B, whereas Ward 2A got substantially.
I think we're probably jumping ahead a little bit in the chronology, Mr. Lambert. But if I get you correctly, what you're saying is you were initially asked to answer the question, can we increase the air change rates to 6?
Yes.
To which the answer was no. with the existing plant, but there are things you could do, various options
To improve it.
to improve it. I think the question might be, and you don't need to give me the detail that goes into it, you ultimately produced a brief to completely redo the system for 2A, to
Yes.
produce 10 air changes per hour and so on and so forth,
Yep.
which we'll look at. Were you given any explanation as to why you weren't asked to do that for 2B?
I think it wasn't deemed viable to do it for Ward 2B at the time. I can't remember the exact reason. It wasn't deemed viable from NHS's perspective. I don't know if it's from a time constraint, from cost, I can't remember.
When you say not viable, are you thinking of technical reasons or other reasons?
Both. It wasn't physically viable you'd need to rip out all the ductwork, you'd need to strip the entire system out
Right.
for Ward 2B. And I think that was what made it less viable. So
less work was required for 2A?
No, more work.
Sorry?
More work.
More work. Okay,
Yeah.
well, I was just exploring this word 2B from GGC's point of view. Improvement of 2B was not viable, and I was just trying to explore this. Whereas, if I picked you up correctly, GGC was looking for a brief to achieve 10 air changes in 2A. Just exploring this word not viable.
I think it's from the functionality, from memory, of the use of the facility probably. They couldn't lose those areas within the hospital. So you'd need to shut the entire ward off to be able to undertake the works. We didn't get asked to look at a main upgrade in that area. The exact reason I can't remember, but it was either cost or that they couldn't lose that area of the hospital to undertake the works.
Couldn't lose the ability to use the facility.
Yes, it's got examination rooms and consultancy rooms and things like that as well.
Thank you.
Apologies, my lord. My numberings aren't matching what is on the electronic system. Let's just try and finish your 2B report, please, Mr. Lambert. At section 405, which is on bundle page 667 of the report, you set out a summary of your findings, and we find there essentially the matters we've been talking about already this morning: air change rates lower, comment about design insofar as you could find out about it, negative pressure, 100% calculation for the fans, spare capacity, clean filters. So all of these are the issues essentially that that we've been discussing this morning.
Yep.
And then what you did, as we've just discussed, is you set out some possible works that could be done with particular costs and so on and so forth. And then what you did was you added a sort of, and here's some additional points at the end. Is that right?
Yeah, they were just other notable observations that were observed whilst we were undertaking the analysis.
And that's something you'd been asked to do, put in your additional observations?
Not at the start.
Sorry?
Not at the start of the process.
Not at the
That was
start.
something that we obviously raised with Ian, and he said put them into the report as well.
Right. So that when you come to section 6 of your 2B report, which is on bundle page 672, you're setting out again, in part, material that we've already looked at. You say that there's supposed to be 125% capacity, but that doesn't seem to be what you're finding. Ductwork classification, I'm not going to ask you about again. the thermal wheel, which you've identified. And you make a comment there about the majority of air handling units have thermal wheels. Where did you get that from?
I'm sure there's an Excel sheet, or there was an Excel sheet on Zootech that identified what other areas within the hospital had air handling units and what heat exchangers were installed within those air handling units.
Yep. Thank you. And why did you think it was a good idea to bring that to the attention of the board?
So I thought someone should risk assess the use of that heat recovery device within other areas of the hospital.
Thank you. First of all, a small point, the air handling unit full of water, were you ever involved in discovering what had ever happened to that unit that was full of water?
No.
Thank you. Let me ask you this. This was, I think, the first report, just in terms of date, stated the 15th of October. Who did you give it to?
I can't remember.
You can't remember.
It would have gone to Mary Ann, Alan Gallagher and Ian Powrie. It might have gone to Colin Purdon as well, I can't remember.
And I can put it this way, not everything in that report was particularly complimentary about what you had found.
No.
Can you remember what kind of reception it got? What was the response to you handing over a report with that kind of material in it?
They were aware of what was coming, I think, because I had a few discussions when I was preparing it. And then there was an urgency to get it back to them. So I think they were aware that there were significant issues.
Okay, well, let me split that into two questions. Are you telling me that a number of the things that you've been telling us about, you'd already indicated you were finding when you were in conversations during the preparation of the report?
Yes.
So it wasn't all a big surprise?
No.
And when you actually produced the report, did you get any immediate response to it or anything of that kind?
Not Ward 2B.
Right.
We were completing Ward 2A. We issued Ward 2B and then Ward 2A came out. So we were kind of just getting on with that. I think they were waiting to get Ward 2A back before they decided what they were doing, probably.
Right. Thank you. Now, my lord, I'm about to go on to Ward 2A, and I'm just looking at the time. I wonder whether this might be the appropriate moment to have a short break.
Right, let's do that. As I said, Mr. Lambert, usually take 20 minutes for coffee. So if I could ask you to be back by 10 to 12.
No problem. Thanks.
Could you mark up my pages of 2A and this?
Mr. Lambert, I have an apology to make to you. I'm told that when I asked you to affirm,
Yep.
I in fact spoke over you when you were asking me to repeat what I had said.
Right at the start.
And because, if I may say so, you began quite softly.
Sorry.
I didn't hear that, but that's a lot to do with the fact that my hearing is not great. So what I propose to do is we'll repeat the affirmation just in case anyone feels that that is an irregularity. So this time I will speak clearly and try not to speak over you. Could you repeat after me?
Yeah.
I solemnly, sincerely and truly.
I solemnly,
Sincerely.
sincerely and truly, as if I got wrong the first time,
Declare and affirm
declare and confirm
that I will tell the truth,
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lambert. And as I say, entirely my fault. Now, Mr. Connell.
Thank you, my lord. I can now fill one apology with another. I'd asked you this morning about your witness statement, Mr. Lambert. Third mistake of the day, Mr. Lambert. What I should have done before I took you to any of the details is asked you if you'd seen it and you were content to adopt it as your evidence to this inquiry. And are you happy to do that?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Right. Now, I may also ask you to look at and I will quote a different number, which you can ignore, but which the technical people here should hopefully recognize as their page numbers so that we can all find the same thing at the same time. Again, which is an error that I've had pointed out to me. I think when we took the break, we'd come to the point where you've delivered or produced your Ward 2B report. You were saying that you thought the estates team with whom you were in communication were expecting the kind of things that were in it, and then you delivered it. And at that point, you were then getting on with your Ward 2A report. Is that correct?
I was doing both at the same time. Yeah. But I was struggling to find information for certain parts of 2A.
Right. Well, if we can look at 2A, and again, what I'll do, Mr. Lambert, is I'll ask you about your lead consultant brief document, which is a different document later, so we can leave that aside. Now, you were asked to look at 2A, and so that we know where to get it when we get there. That report is in bundle 6, document 34, page 674. So that's the one we'll look at shortly. Did you go about doing the same job as you did for 2B, i.e. finding out what patients were anticipated to be within 2A?
Yes.
And what did you find?
Teenage cancer trust kids and bone marrow transplant.
Now, am I right in thinking that part of Ward 2A was excluded from the work you were asked to do?
Yes, the bottom area.
And how could you distinguish which bit was yours and which wasn't? What was on bottom area?
We were shown on plan by estates, Ian Powdy.
Right. And what did you understand to be the part that was excluded from the request for your work?
There was can't remember. I think it was bone marrow transplant at the bottom as well. And there was isolation suites.
Right. Sorry, can I just get that? When you're asked which parts you were asked to look at, if I noted you correctly, you said Children's Cancer Trust, is that right? And the bone marrow transplant.
Yeah, the Schiehallion ward. It was
in the Schiehallion ward.
Yep.
Now these are two areas within 2A, is that right?
Yeah, I called it the upper section of 2A before a set of double doors.
Okay. And when you say upper, I mean, it's all on the same horizontal
Yes,
level.
on plan,
Right.
the upper kind of horseshoe part.
Right. And the excluded part you describe as the
Isolation suites,
and anything else.
BMT. There was a BMT space as well, I think.
Right. So there's bone marrow transplant rooms in the part you were asked to look at, but also bone marrow transplant rooms that you were not asked to look at.
It was, but BMT would be noted on the plans, whereas the other rooms were SCH numbers for the Shallian board. So they didn't say bone marrow transplant patients. Whereas the bit we asked not to look at did. If that makes any sense.
So on the plan, the bit you're not asked to look at was noted as bone marrow transplant.
From memory, yes.
My fault, I'm sure. But
No.
I noted you to begin with by saying that part you were asked to look at included bone marrow transplant. Now, did I get that wrong?
I didn't realise it was, at the time, it was just Shallian wards on the drawings. It was
Right.
only until we queried what the room occupancy or room use was
Right,
that we discovered it was that function as well.
right. So on the plans, the rooms were marked SCH.
Yep.
But you discovered that they were being used for bone marrow transplant patients.
Yes.
Right.
Lodged. And in terms of your brief, your initial brief, was it the same for Ward 2A as it had been for Ward 2B, as you've described earlier?
Yes.
Can you increase from whatever figure you find up to 6?
Yes.
And just for the record, what level of air change rate did you find when you started to look at 2A?
Similar to what we found in 2B, about 2.8-ish.
Based on what you had been told, what air change rate would you have expected to find in that ward, 2A?
For a single room 6, for neutropenic 10 air changes.
And I, as we said, you subsequently prepared a brief for that, which I'll come to. And was your source of information in relation to 2A the same as it was for 2B?
Yes, Zutec.
And in relation to your report on 2A, was your brief expanded, if I can use that word, as matters proceeded
Yes.
in light of discussions?
Yes.
So you're saying yes?
Yes. We were asked to consider what would be required relative to the use of the patients.
Right. So that's perhaps a slightly different issue. So who asked you to look at what was required given the patients that were involved?
Ian Powrie from memory.
Ian Powrie. Just so I'm making sure we've got this clearly, on page 28 of your statement, which is bundle 84, bundle page 84, you say in answer to section 74, refer to my previous answer, then you say you were subsequently asked to include within the report upgrade options relative to the patient group. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
And then you then set out what guidance you looked at in order to do that,
Yes.
which was SHTM 0301 and SHPN 04 Supplement 1.
Yes.
Were they materials that you were familiar with?
Yes. Less so SHP NO4.
Thank you. Now, if we look to the next page of your statement, which is page 85 in the electronic bundle, question 77, you're asked the question, well, okay, so same instruction, different part of the ward, 2A now. Was there any significant difference that you found between the systems that you found in the first one to the second one? And you talk about exhaust air. Can you just explain what the point about exhaust air in 2A was?
Well, into A, it's probably notable to mention that Ward 2A ventilation system didn't just serve Ward 2A, it served level 3 or areas in level 3, level 1, and other areas in the hospital.
Right.
So it was extracting, the air it was pulling back to the air handling unit wasn't from clean areas in the hospital and those facilities, it was from dirty areas like sluices and cleaner stores and toilets.
Right.
And the clean air from the bedrooms was ducted directly to outside, whereas I would expect to see the complete opposite.
Right, just help us understand this if we can. Bear in mind, we're not ventilation engineers yet, but we'll get there. You were saying you'd expect the opposite. So this is air that has been extracted from areas that you describe as dirty.
Yes.
And I think in your statement you list toilets, shower rooms, dirty utility rooms, disposal rooms, and so on.
Public areas, general public areas within the hospital.
And it's being routed back, you say, to the air handling unit.
Yes.
And what's the significance of that?
Risk of cross-contamination.
So the air is being taken out of these areas and sent back to the air handling unit, which serves various areas, including 2A. What happens to it when it gets there? Does it get recirculated?
No, but it goes through a heat reclaim device that's got a risk of cross-contamination, in my opinion.
Right.
Sorry, I missed that.
It's got a risk through the thermal wheel. It's got the risk of cross-contamination to the fresh air supply that you're bringing in. So it brings back exhaust air from the rooms, and it goes through the heat reclaim device to try and heat up the fresh air coming from outside. So that risk of cross-contamination. Whereas everywhere else in the hospital that I looked at, the extracted air from dirty areas was directly to outside without going through a heat reclaim device. Whereas for some reason, Ward 2A, the dirty areas were brought back to that air handling unit.
And when you say the air from the dirty areas, are you including level 1 and level 3?
Yes.
Because just for clarification, 2A is on the second floor of the building. And as you've said, one air handling unit is serving 2A, but also at least part of the third level and part of the first level.
And I think from memory, part of the ground floor as well.
And part of the ground floor.
Like a 24-hour walk-in.
And is dirty air being circulated?
Dirty area.
Sorry?
dirty area. Yeah, like, so it's not extract from an office or extract from a patient's ensuite. It's extract from less cleanly environments.
Yes, you're correct. Correct me.
Yeah.
When we're talking about dirty air, we mean air that is less clean than the air that would be circulated within 2A.
Yes.
Right.
And that was dissimilar from other areas and other systems within the hospital. Whereas that type of dirty utility room, disposal rooms wasn't brought back to the handling units. It was served by a dedicated extract only system.
And the effect of that would be that it was simply exhausted into the outside air. I can use that.
Without heat reclaim.
Without heat reclaim. But for some reason in this case, the air, which had potential levels of contamination in it, we don't know what, was being brought back to a heat exchange, to an air handling unit, which was then serving Ward 2A.
Yes.
were you able to work out why in that particular situation that had been set up in that way?
No. I would say it was either an error or to improve the energy efficiency of the system.
Thank you. So, apart from that peculiar difference, if I can call it that, was what you found in 2A similar to what you'd found in 2B?
No. 2B didn't bring back that exhaust system.
No. I apologize. I mean, leave aside that particular issue, the bringing back of the dirty air in a way that you didn't expect to find. Put that aside for a moment.
Yeah.
In other respects, did what you found in Ward 2A turn out to be similar to what you'd found in 2B?
Yes.
Air change rates, similar?
Yep.
Thank you. Now, when you reported on this, were you concerned with what you'd found?
Yes.
Can we look at your Ward 2A report, document 34, electronic page 676, it's what you would find as page 1 of 24, which is the executive summary. And obviously there's a lot of calculations that lie behind that I'm not going to trouble you with. You say at the very start of that executive summary, at the top of the page, that following analysis, you anticipate the original accommodation design philosophy was not intended for use by patients with immune response impairment deficiency. On the contrary, the existing ventilation strategy would appear only likely to promote the risks associated with uncontrolled ingress of infectious aerosols into patient areas. That's a pretty strongly worded paragraph. Were you quite comfortable that that was what you found?
Yes.
We know you only had access to Zutec and so on. Why were you able to comment on the design philosophy of that particular air handling system?
What we found was there was the extract rate from the bedroom ensuite was higher than the bedroom supply air, and it was supply air getting inputted into the corridor. So
Right.
if you're extract, you're pulling more air out of the toilet, and there's no natural ventilation. There's only one way that air can go, and it's through the patient's bedroom.
Right. And is that not something you would expect to see?
No,
Why not?
because you're putting the patient at risk from air from adjacencies, less cleanliness.
So would you expect the air from the ensuite to go in a different direction?
No. You'd expect the air put into the bedroom, some of it to be removed from the toilet, and the rest to go out into the corridor.
Right. And was that what was happening?
No. I felt it was getting pulled through into the ensuite from the corridor and the bedroom into the ensuite, so it's pulling the wrong direction.
So the general result of all of this, I'll come back to the detail in a minute, the general result was you thought that air was being drawn into the place the patient was occupying rather than being kept out.
Yes.
Is that correct? And the peculiarity was that was influenced by the amount of the way the extract in the ensuite was set up.
Yes.
So the air change rates were similar. Similar conclusion that you couldn't increase to 6 with what was there.
Yes.
Were there chilled beam units in 2A?
Yes.
Well, just let's go down another paragraph in your executive summary, You say in paragraph 3 on that page, desired increase to achieve 6 air changes now deemed impractical. And just take us through the next section. You say, in view of numerous deficiencies, inadequacies, we consider significant system modification / replacement will be necessary in any event. Why did you say something as dramatic as that?
Probably in terms of the air handling plant.
And you're suggesting here in that paragraph that there should be a complete separation of ward, I think upper ward 2A facilities from the existing system.
Yes.
And why were you suggesting that?
I didn't think it should serve other areas within the hospital, and it should be a dedicated system with resilience and backup facilities.
Right. So you thought it should be separated from the rest of the hospital. Why?
So it's a dedicated facility to that patient group. You'd have different filtration than you'd have in sluices and other areas. And
right. So there'll be different levels of filtration for that patient group from general areas. Is that right?
yes,
What kind of different filtration?
you'd have HEPA filtration.
So you were suggesting separate it so it's not connected to the hospital. It will have different filtration. And then I think you said with resilience built in?
Backup air handling plant,
Backup
or
air
duplicate
handling.
fans, or so if you had a critical failure, the system could still operate, and it would lend itself to being able to maintain the centralised equipment as well.
Right. But so what you're envisaging there is duplication.
N+1. Yep.
Sorry, what was your?
N+1. So it's an operation plus you've got a full redundancy essentially.
And you use the phrase N+1.
Yes.
Is that taken from somewhere else?
That'll be an SHTM 0301.
Right. So you were really suggesting that if the plant broke down, there'd be another one ready to operate immediately.
Or a duplicate fan motor. So if a fan breaks, you can operate
Right.
the other fan. Ideally separate.
Yeah. Now, on that page, you deal with the dirty air issue. You also deal with an issue I don't think was ultimately taken ahead, which was an idea of creating isolation suites within that space, which ultimately...
Sorry, Mr. Connell, my fault.
Sorry.
Which page?
We're still on the same page, the executive summary, Milan,
Right, okay.
which is page 676 of the
Yes,
electronic
no,
bundle.
I have that. I wasn't sure if we were.
No, we're still there. At the foot of page 676, you've dealt with the dirty air issue that you've explained to us. And you've also, just prior to that, indicated numerous other inadequacies, which we'll make sure we pick up later. But in the middle of that page, there's a paragraph starting the viability. Was this something else that was looked at, but then ultimately not proceeded with? Creating dedicated isolation suites.
I think that was I was brought up during discussions with the Impowry and infection control.
Right.
When we're looking at what facilities should Ward 2A have. 10 air changes, 10 pascals positive. I was concerned about how would you monitor 10 pascals differential across the bedrooms. You can set it up to accommodate that pressure cascade, but how would you know if it deviates?
Right.
And how would you alarm it and things like that if a nurse left the bedroom door open? How would you recognise there's a problem there? So there was aspects that we introduced into the proposals that they came out of those meetings.
Right. Okay. Let me go back a little bit to make sure we're getting this right. First of all, the measurement of the pressure between one place and another is expressed in pascals.
Pascals, yeah.
And for this patient cohort, I think you were talking about 10 pascals. That was 10 pascals of positive pressure.
From bedroom to corridor, yeah.
From bedroom to corridor. Thank you. To make sure that there was enough pressure there to stop the ingress of anything out with patient bedroom into the bedroom. Is that the idea?
With the door shut.
With the door shut?
Yep.
And you then went on in your answer to talk about the question of, well, if you set that up in that way, how would you know if it was working? Is that right?
Yep.
So what were you discussing as a means of letting you know whether that protection system was operating or not?
Pressure differential monitors. It would measure the pressure difference between the two spaces.
Pressure differential monitoring.
Yep.
And how, in your experience, would that usually be done?
Sensors, a building management system, a control system.
Right.
And we also look for it to be linked back to the nurse station. So it would be on a panel and it would highlight if there was a drop in pressure.
So you have to have something in place that, to use a non-technical, keeps an eye on the pressure.
Yes.
And then you have to have that linked to somewhere to alert somebody if it's not working.
Yes.
Or drops.
Yes.
And were you suggesting, or maybe it wasn't your suggestion, that enter the discussions that might be the nurse station?
Yes.
And again, I'm just trying to get an understanding of where that comes into the sequence of events. I've been asking you to look at your report, which we know has a certain date on it. Was this discussion about pressure differentials and alarms during the preparation of your report or afterwards?
After.
After. Thank you. So that might be reflected in what we'll come to look at in your specification for Ward 2A.
Yep.
Thank you. But otherwise, the kind of conclusions you were reaching on 2A, were they similar to the ones that you reached on 2B?
Yes.
So we've got issues about thermal wheels and so on and so forth that we've discussed earlier. And your report sets out, I think, on successive pages, all the technical detail again about the ductwork and air change rates and so on that you were able to find out, and the air terminals, correct?
Yep.
And the chilled heating and so on and so forth. And just for completeness, can we then move to a summary of your findings for 2A, which you'll find in section 405 of the report, page 14 for your numbering 689 for the electronic bundle. Just wait until we get 689. So on this page and on the immediate succeeding page, you're summarizing what was found in this ward, some of which will be familiar. So you start first bullet point, 3 air changes. Can I just ask, while we're on that, did you find when you were looking anything to support in the ZUTEC or associated documents the use of 3 as a figure?
No.
Then the second bullet point there is essentially negative pressure, which is the point we've been discussing. Air handling unit sized on 100% design. That's the same. Is that the same point again as for 2B?
Yep.
And then the supply and extract fans have a limited extent of spare capacity, 15.5 and 9%, 9.5. Well, there are two questions there. These are odd numbers if it was supposed to be 125. Why do we find things like 15.5 and 9.5?
So I've asked the manufacturer what the fan duty is capable of providing in terms of airflow rate, and I've referenced that to the H&V commissioning documentation for the supply fan and the extract fan. So the spare capacity in the supply fan with everything clean in the system would be 15.5%. With everything in the extract system completely clean, the spare fan capacity was found to be 9.5% of the air volume.
And do you know why these figures are the ones that emerged from your research?
I believe the air handling manufacturer was asked to select the fan units based on these duties, supply air duties and extract air duties at full speed with clean systems.
Right. So he's asked to select the kit based on these parameters, and the resulting kit happens to have these capacities in them.
Yes. That's the nearest fan selection relative to the design duty.
Now, perhaps could you just repeat that answer for me? I didn't quite pick it up.
That's the nearest fan selection relative to the duty.
Right. Thank you. If you were going to take what you found in Ward 2A and change the air change rates from 2.8 or 3 or whatever the figure was to 10, would that be possible with the ductwork and so on that you found?
No.
And is it just the ductwork
Well,
that's affected?
You could practically do it, but you wouldn't, in terms of noise level and things like that, no.
No. And what about the other parts that go together to make the air handling system? Could you just change it up to 10?
The entire system wouldn't be suitable, essentially.
Thank you. And if you have to change the system, let's say you were aiming to change it to 10 air changes an hour, would that, in your view, be likely to require changes to the general structure of the rooms and so on?
It could impact the structure of the slabs, concrete, because the air handler would be significantly heavier. Your ductwork would be bigger. Your terminals, you'd either have more terminals or larger terminals. Everything in the system would get significantly larger.
Yeah. Thank you.
So it could affect the structural support required for the fan units.
Yeah, if your air handling unit was, I don't know, 250 kilograms to do 2.5, you might be a ton. It wouldn't go up linear, but it would be significantly heavier.
Right. Thank you.
I think you've already told us about the extract from the... Ah, yes. Can we just look at page 36 of your report, which is electronic page 92? At the top of the page, I just want to make sure we've got this thing about the ensuite extract amounts. This is page 92 of his statement, sorry. This is the issue we were trying to make sure we were understanding earlier, Mr. Lambert. So apologies for being a little slow on the uptake. It says here in one of the answers, the volume of air being extracted from the ensuite was higher than that being supplied into the associated bedroom. Therefore, this differential in makeup air must be derived from somewhere. What's the point you're trying to make there?
If you're extracting from a room, the air's got to come from somewhere. And if you're not putting the same amount or more air, you're putting less air into the bedroom than you're sucking out the toilet. So there's a differential in air quantity, or the amount of air that you're pulling out. So if it's not coming from the bedroom and you can't open the window, it's got to come from somewhere.
And there's a risk it comes from outside the room.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. One question I may not have put to you earlier about the use of air handling units designed. Sorry, I should ask a question. Do you recall finding what capacity the air handling units in 2A were designed to operate at? Were they designed to operate at 90%, 100%, what?
That was the percentages earlier at 15.5 and
Right.
oh, that was the spare capacity.
So they had spare capacity. I mean, operating an air handling unit towards the top end of its capacity, does it have any impact on its performance or anything else?
We'd need to speak to manufacturers and ask that question, but it's like driving a car at full belt. It's not a good idea. I wouldn't have thought, in my opinion.
Okay. Now, I'm not going to ask you about the ultimate proposal yet. But am I right in thinking that your ultimate conclusion was something pretty significant needed to be done toward 2A?
Yes.
And am I right in thinking that the format of your Ward 2A report followed the same pattern as your 2B report? In other words, you go through the process, you say what you found, you set out your views on it, and then you add a kind of additional points section at the end.
But 2A had an additional section in it, section 6.
Right. Now, you're referring us to section 6, which is on electronic 693 of this document. So this is bundle 6, document 34, page 693. This was an additional section that you had compared to your 2B report.
Yes.
And what was the purpose of this section?
To consider what facilities would be required to appropriately serve the patient group within Ward 2A.
Now, at that stage, when you're just finishing your initial investigations and handing over your report, had you reached firm conclusions as to what exactly had to be done?
A complete replacement.
A complete replacement. Okay. And the question of what the complete replacement would produce in terms of air changes, pascals of pressure, and so on, was ultimately something you were asked to look at and put down in writing. Is that right?
Yes.
I'll come to that in a moment then. And just for completeness then, section 7 of the report we're looking at, which starts on the electronic page 697, contains what I was jumping ahead to, which was similar points to what we found in the 2B report, i.e. additional points, many of which we've touched on. So the first one was the dirty areas air movement you've dealt with, is that right?
Yep.
And then the thermal wheels, which we've talked about. Point 3 is resilience. Now, point 4, you talk about significant irregularities with regard to the air handling unit extract air volume. Why was that worth reporting on?
I think there was such a variance in different documents.
Okay, now I'm looking for your purposes at page 22 of 24. It's page 697 of the electronic one. You got that?
Yep.
You see at the foot of page 22 of 24, page 697, you're talking significant irregularities.
Yep.
Just tell us what you're reporting on there.
So the extract, well, that's extract air volume. So the manufacturer's literature for that air handler unit says it was the unit was selected based on a design air volume of 2.65 meters cubed per second of air. So the volume of air was meant to be 2.65.
Now, tell us, in case we don't follow that, why is that an important figure?
That's the amount of air. That's the volume of air in the extract system. And in the following page, I've said the H&V commissioning record.
Right, so on electronic page 698 now at the top of the page. So this is the commissioning company's records.
Yes. So it notes that the design air volume is meant to be 2.563, whereas they physically commissioned the system at 2.913.
And why does that matter?
It's a significant differential in amount of air, and it differed from the manufacturer. So the manufacturer's selection was based on 2.6, but the system is actually doing 2.9, which is a lot more. And that will reduce your spare capacity in your system, in your air handler.
Right, can you take me through these steps, Mr. Lambert? We're talking about, as I understand it, the capacity of an air handling unit.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, the supply fan or the extract fan.
The right, you're discussing extract at this
Yeah,
point.
on this. Yeah.
Right. So it's designed to extract 2.65 cubic meters per second.
According to the air handling unit manufacturer.
Right. H&V is the specialized commissioning company. It thinks the design capacity is 2.53.
Yep.
And finds it with the commissioned air volume being 2.9.13. Does that involve some sort of physical testing to see what the air handling unit is in fact doing?
Yes.
Now, to somebody ignorant like me, that would seem to be performing at a higher rate or than it's designed to. Now, is that a good thing, a bad thing, or what's the significance of that?
It will reduce the capacity of your fan selection. If the fan was only selected to provide 2.65, whereas the system, you're actually pulling 2.9. So it's working a lot harder than it was designed to.
Okay, so so the system is requiring the fan to do more work than it's designed for, or is that too simple?
No, there's more volume. There's a discrepancy in the amount of volume getting pulled from the system that doesn't relate to the fan selection or H&V's commissioning. And then my next point, I've said I added up the grills and I got 2.76 meters cube a second. So what I picked off the as fitted record drawings didn't relate to the manufacturer's design flow rate or the H&V flow rate design or the H&V flow rate at commissioning stage. Mine was completely different.
And what's the significance of these discrepancies?
Well, the fan was working a lot harder than it was designed to.
Right, which I take it is not a good thing.
No.
Right.
Thank you. Well obliged. And elsewhere on that, effectively the final page, are you picking up a number of other technical issues, many of which we've already discussed today?
Yeah.
Thank you. When you delivered this report, the Ward 2A report, in which, if anything, if I can put it to you, Mr. Lambert, you're even less complimentary about the system than you were about 2B. First of all, how did you deliver the report?
Email.
By email. Who to?
Again, it would have been issued to Alan Gallagher, Mary Ann Kane and Ian Powrie.
And what kind of reception did you get this time?
I think it was, from memory, they wanted to know if we could look at redesigning the systems.
Right. So they didn't come back and complain about your report. They wanted to get more help
How
from
do you fix it?
I see. And am I right in thinking that you then were asked to prepare what to a layperson might look a bit like an outline of what was going to be required in order to get the process started for doing some work?
Yeah, the appointment of another consultant to
The
take the
appointment
job
of another
forward.
consultant.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps we can ask you to look at another document then, which is Bundle 27, Volume 1, page 43. First of all, is that the document that I just described in somewhat layman's terms?
Yeah.
It's a lead consultant appointment brief. So it's dated the 10th of December. Now, your Ward 2A report was delivered, what, in October?
Yeah.
24th of October. Help us understand then what happens between the delivery of your 2A report and the creation of the lead consultant appointment brief.
There will be discussions with Ian Powrie and infection control, reviewing documents on the SHTMs to more accurately determine what the facility should have.
Do you remember who you spoke to other than Mr. Powrie?
Teresa Ringster.
Teresa Inkster.
And I think we spoke to Peter Hoffman.
Possibly Peter Hoffman. And what the document we're looking at the moment, what's it intended to do?
Outline what the system should include in terms of the air handling unit, pressure differentials, air change rates, filtration, redundancy, spare capacities.
And this is for another consultant to be appointed to be involved in
Redesign
work.
the entire system. Yeah.
Well, and what did you put in? Sorry. After discussion with Mr. Powrie, Dr. Inkster, or whoever, what were you trying to do in this document? What was your objective?
Outline what the ventilation system should provide relative to neutropenic patients.
So, actually, see it sits on NHS Glasgow and Clyde paper, but did you produce this?
Yes.
Okay. And in the first paragraph, we see the fundamental objective of the project is to ensure the upper portion, so we're still excluding some bit of it, the upper portion of Ward 2A in the Children's Hospital is suitable for use by immunocompromised patients. It is proposed to convert existing accommodation facilities to afford enhanced positive pressure single bedrooms with en-suite facilities, providing 10 air changes an hour positive pressure within each bedroom space and ensuring the bedrooms are at 10 pascals, is that right?
Yep.
Relative to the adjacent corridors. So where did that specification come from, those figures?
SHTM 0301.
Yeah. And then you go on in the next paragraph to talk about needing a system to provide that regime while maintaining pressure differentials and noting that you need to ensure that plant failure doesn't influence the system operation or undermine safety and patient care. Now, is that the issue about, you know, a unit failing or something.
Yes.
Right. And then your point you made earlier, you envisage in paragraph 3, the works will be predominantly focused around complete replacement, together with improvements in the internal building fabric. What were we talking about there about internal building fabric improvements?
Well, the existing bedrooms had suspended grids,
Right.
and I think we opened some of the grids up and noticed there was penetrations and leakage. So you couldn't positively pressurise a room if you could get inadvertent air escaping from the space. You need it to be sealed.
And presumably the higher amount of pressure you want, the more important it is.
You'd need to put more air in to overcome the loss of air going out.
I think I was about to ask you whether the higher the pressure in the room, the more key it is to have the room sealed.
Yes.
Could I just take that from you again, Mr. Lambert? You found the existing bedrooms. Now, did I note you correctly as saying on suspended grids?
Same, yeah, suspended ceiling grid. The same as the suspended ceiling grid, the same as in here.
Suspended ceiling grid,
Yeah.
right. And the point is that if you want to achieve positive pressure, you need a sealed space.
Yes.
Right. Thank you.
Then you go on in the next paragraph, you say some degree of modification or replacement with regards to other mechanical and electrical services is also anticipated. Why were you mentioning that? What was involved in that element?
Well, if you're taking down the ceiling, you're putting plasterboard up, you'd need to change the lighting. You'd need to relocate fire alarm or detectors, any other fixtures and fittings. You need to modify.
BMS, is that building management system?
It is. And the heating and the chilled water in the heating circuits, because you're putting in more supply air. So you'd need to heat it or cool it. You'd need to increase the duties.
And then you go on to set out in this document items that are said to be of particular significance. The first one being design principles within SHTM 0301. Second, which is perhaps obvious, minimizing downtime as far as possible.
Yep.
And taking account of impact on adjoining facilities. I see you mentioned HAI Scribe there. Is that something you're familiar with?
iScribe. Yep.
Yeah.
The cleanliness.
And what's that about? Why are you mentioning it there?
So it doesn't undermine the other areas of the hospital.
And then you're talking about what's actually going to be involved in the next bullet point. You're having to basically detach this system from other areas.
I was highlighting to the consultant that it was connected, that system was, and within Ward 2, it was connected to a wider system.
Yep.
So if you start cutting the ductwork away, you'd need to isolate the supply and extract to multiple flow areas.
Right.
That's downtime as well, because when you're doing that, you've got a downtime to the other areas in the hospital.
Yeah, so it's not just a question of saying, well, take out this unit and put in another one, because this unit is connected,
Yep.
as you've illustrated, to other floors of the hospital.
And then you'd need to rebalance. If you cut the ductwork away, you'd need to rebalance the rest of the system as well. The remaining sections of the system. Because you've reduced the air flow rate and the pressure drop, your system design's changed.
Yeah. So if we look on to the next page of your brief, which is 44 on the electronic page, page 2 of 7, you're talking about 100% resilience. So I probably didn't pick up your reference to 2N.
N+1.
Yeah, N+1, right. So are you actually talking about having 2 air handling units?
Yes.
And the need to make sure that if you're maintaining one, the other one will click into action. If I can be
Yep.
lay person about it. Thank you.
I mean, just so that I'm following this, when you say n+1, is the n whatever number of air handling units you have, and the 1 is the extra
one. Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
And the next bullet point deals with something we haven't really discussed very much today, which is HEPA filtration, but that's what you were envisaging.
Yes, that's an SHTMO 301 for neutropenic patients.
And is
Right,
your
so
point,
that-
again...
Can I just get that? Does it follow that you did not find HEPA filtration in 2A?
Yes.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Maud. I just wanted to check, is it the same point that you're making about HEPA filters as you were making about the fans, that you have to take account of the fact that they have to operate under dirty conditions, i.e. used but maintained in an ordinary way?
Yeah. HEPA filters have got a very high resistance relative to a normal filter.
Because
But you
the
still
air has to be
maintain them.
forced through them.
Yeah, it's smaller cross-sectional area, a smaller free area through the grillage, but through the filter medium.
Yep. The next point, you're touching on heat recovery and suggesting that has to be looked at carefully. Is that really all you're saying there?
Yep.
All right. Now, I see now that you deal with existing internal fabric. In the next bullet point, suspended modular ceilings, partitions, services penetration. So that's where for instance, a pipe goes through the wall.
Yep.
IPS panels.
Like a toilet system to conceal pipework and
And you're suggesting that that has to be carefully sealed.
yep.
And you quote a maximum air leakage rate. Presumably that's also from guidance.
Yes.
And then monitoring. And now, is this the business of alarms to the nurse station that you were talking about?
Yep.
And I suppose that the final bullet point on that page is probably repeating the same point, that because you're getting filtered air in, you need to make sure that everything is sealed.
Yep.
At the foot of that page, are you talking about entrance lobbies to the ward generally rather than to the individual rooms?
Yes.
But what were you suggesting?
I think that's something that came up from infection control and meetings with Ian Powdery, that they were, how would you protect inadvertent air ingress into the general ward? And it was decided the best way to mitigate that was to put like an entrance lobby where you open one door, enter, the door shuts, and then you can open the next lobby. And you pressurise the lobby so you don't get air ingress from the wider hospital environment.
Sort of airlock.
Airlock.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then when you go on to the next page, which is 3 of 7 on your document, page 45 electronically, you find some final references to monitoring. Well, that's the point we've touched on. Possible changes to other things like alarm systems and so on. And then air permeability testing. Why did this crop up on your list?
That's air leakage. That's to allow you to positively pressurise the space. So you'd test it, you'd physically test what the air leakage is.
And that's got to be done once you've built the new system.
That's so you can validate that what you've tried to do is achieved.
Now, I think I'm right in saying, Mr. Lambert, that the remainder of this document is really focused on what the other conditions that the consultant will be picking up on, what his appointment will be based on, insurance cover and so on, rather than on in technical details of the work that's to be done. Is that right?
Yep.
Thank you. Were you involved with the further work on this project?
We were asked to stay on and be involved with overseeing the lead consultant's design up to tender stage.
Up to tender stage?
Yeah.
Were you involved in the carrying out of the works toward 2A?
No, we provided a list of comments to the consultant during the design, I think, at tender stage. And then I think from memory, there's a lot of other things that came to light when they started opening up bits and pieces in the ward, and it delayed things. And I think the redesign grew arms and legs, and then our remit was stopped.
Right. I just have one more ventilation document to ask you about. Because that document we've just been looking at is dated the 10th of December 2018. There's an addendum to that, which is bundle 27, volume 1, page 50. And this is dated the 15th of March 2019. So you do your brief in December. What happens between December and March?
We were asked to look at improvements. Well, what could you do toward 2B without removing the entire system from memory?
So the proposed program for 2A involved basically taking out what was there and putting something new in.
Yep.
Was it explained to you why that wasn't to be done for 2B?
Not from memory, no.
So your remit was to come up with, as it were, an addendum which talked about improving things but not doing what was being done for 2A.
Essentially leaving as much of the system in as you could, but try and improve it from an air cleanliness and air change rates without making large alterations to the existing system.
And again, just for completeness, this additional work scope appears on NHS paper, but is it something you prepared?
Yes.
And who did you discuss matters with prior to putting pen to paper for this document?
Ian Powrie.
So it's a fairly short document, single page. We see it's additional to those referenced in the immediately preceding document. And you say the principal objective is to ensure all air supply provisions are afforded HEPA filtration, including the Ward 2A BMT preparation room specifically requested by NHGDC infection control specialists. How did that come about? What was the discussion there?
That would have been something that I must have been Teresa was looking for to be added in, specifically for that area.
So was the question how you went about ensuring that everything was HEPA filtered, all the air was HEPA filtered?
Yep.
And something slightly different is being talked about in the next paragraph, centralized HEPA filtration. Just to help us understand how that works.
That means the filtration is at the air handling unit rather than at the terminal. So you can filter it at either or both.
Right. So if we were talking about this room, instead of a HEPA filter going to the circular grill in the ceiling that you pointed to earlier, it would be at an earlier point of the system so that all air coming here would be HEPA filtered.
Yeah, it'd be out of the air handling unit.
Thank you. Was there any advantage or disadvantage to that, so far as you could see?
You wouldn't need to go into the facility and change all the individual. You wouldn't need to put HEPA filters at every unit. You could do it centrally.
Right. Okay. So it sort of works disruption, that's the issue there.
Yeah.
You don't need to go and come into this room, chuck everybody out and take that grill out because
Yeah.
you're doing it somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. And then in the next paragraph, you're talking about rebalancing again. Now, just so we're understanding what you as an M&E engineer mean about rebalancing, what are you trying to achieve here?
I'm trying to put more supply air into the BMT areas and make sure it's cascading into the adjacent corridor.
But there's a qualification to that paragraph. It says, well, what you can achieve is going to depend on building fabric air tightness.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the problem that you were having to face?
The same as Word 2A. You won't be able to positively pressurise a space if it's leaking through the grid.
Well, Lord, I'm conscious of the time. I don't have a huge number of questions, but there are another couple of documents I might ask this witness to look at. So I'm happy to continue or rise for lunch now as you prefer.
Well, it's nearly 1 o'clock, and I think we planned on the possibility of going into the afternoon, so we'll take a lunch break now. Could I ask you to be back for 2 o'clock, Mr. Lambert?
No problem.
Thank you.